Artwork, critiques, Photoshop files, and reference sheets are all available on my Patreon.
Well, hello there, guys and girls. I hope you're doing well. My name's Mikey. Welcome back to my room. It's time for another tutorial. And today we're going to be taking a look at how to draw breasts for your own anime and manga characters. But in particular, we're actually going to be focusing on natural boobs, how they hang across the body, especially when they're not being squeezed together by clothing. And what I'm really quickly just having a go at here is basically you might see some designs, and by the way, this is all fine, but it just doesn't work in reality. You might see some designs where a character has their boobs all squished up in these big, lovely circular shapes, just like we've done before as well, with plenty of cleavage and squeeze. And the idea of what's going on here is that these boobs are being designed with the concept in mind that they are under some kind of external pressure and support, i.e. some kind of bra or some kind of top that's pushing and squeezing everything together to create some cleavage, which is where everything squeezes into the middle. Now that is absolutely fine, but the problem is if you then try to draw your character without wearing any top clothes on whatsoever, and the boobs are still floating up here, then that just doesn't actually work out and it starts to look a little bit weird. So I thought what we need to do is just take a look at those slightly more natural circumstances. And that also means that this tutorial today, with any luck that is going to be useful for any forms of illustration, life studies and character design, not just the anime and manga side of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work as quickly as possible, which is always my disclaimer for saying this might be a bit rough around the edges. And we're going to have a look at a couple of different chests and a few different types of boob and so on. I'm just working on super cheap disposable printer paper, if you're following along at home, and a super cheap mechanical pencil as well. You'll notice I've got another scrap of paper down just to rest my hand on because it's very warm today and I don't want to kind of grease or schmutz up my page as I'm kind of cracking along. So I'm just going to give some very vague indications of a chest and arm build-up. And like any type of body tutorial, when we focus on any body part, it's always worth mentioning that boobs come in all shapes and sizes. There's no one fast iron rule, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm a very big fan of them. But I'm going to try to cover at least some very common things that are worth thinking about with our chesty character designs. So let's get a tiny bit of chest cavity popping around there. I'm just going to bring that line in a little bit on either side to very quickly build up some body form. And then what I'm also going to do is another very similar chest just over here. But this one, I'm going to throw this box of a chest shape into a little bit of angle. So if I imagine that I've got this kind of shallow rectangle from the side now, I can use that as a little bit of a guide to say, okay, let's get that egg shape, which makes up a very simple rib cage area, our kind of firm building blocks. Our shoulders are still coming across here. Now our circle for the rough shoulder area is cutting in on that side and being hidden a little bit more on that side, but everything is still vaguely along similar planes, just for the sake of popping this all together. Let's throw that arm back. And as usual, everything that we draw today will be available on Patreon on the work pack, available just for $1 with all these reference images. So thank you very much for liking, subscribing, following along, of course. But the main point is that boobs are fantastic. However, I want you guys to be able to actually draw them in a realistic manner. And when it comes to the anime stylization of things, sure, you might actually draw them as a bit less realistic, super pert and perky in areas where they might be falling under a bit more gravity normally. But in order to break those rules, firstly, you must learn them. Okay, so two very rough chest areas. Now, when it comes to a not quite so insanely massive natural boob on a character, what I like to do is imagine that I'm starting from inside the neck area here, right just above this top zone, and I'm slowly sweeping out and around into this little quadrant. So what I've done is I've gone below the shoulder circles, and obviously I've got the chest neatly popped in half, somewhere about there, and I'm going to sweep this line down, and it's only once I'm past this line that I'm going to break up the profile or the silhouette of the chest and come out around here. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to give this character some kind of boob, but they don't necessarily have to be incredibly full. So we might start with lower cup sizes and work our way around. And if I just very lightly follow this line up, I'm going to create an elliptical shape that exists inside this area here. An egg on its side, leaning in just a little bit, something like that. Now I'm working relatively lightly just because I want to say that with a slightly smaller boob on an anime character, I might just define this as being this line here. So I'm thinking about this entire oval, but I might only draw in my final copy this outside edge around about here. And then what I will do, if I want to make this cup size a little bit bigger, the boob a little bit larger and fuller, I will just simply follow this line further round in my final line art to indicate more mass and more boob tucking back in, like so. So depending on how much you want to go for things, it can be simple as a line around the outside edge. So I'm just going to very quickly repeat that again on this side. Let's start from around about here. Imagine we're traveling out, down, past, out and around, just breaking on the outside edge before I lightly sweep in that shape, just like this. And again, okay, we've got our little tuck of the armpit here. And then I might just have this line cut in a little bit before I sweep around this outside edge, coming down and around. Sorry, this is so rough, but hopefully this is giving you the idea, and coming away like that. And what I just wanted to point out here is that you'll notice that these two things aren't being squeezed together by a Wonder Bra. We don't have any cleavage in the middle, because when your character's just kind of hanging out there with some natural bust, and we can certainly talk about fake boobs in the future and how they maintain a bit more of their shape and firmness. They act a bit more differently. But these two right here are just kind of relaxing, but also going outwards. So if I think about where the kind of nipple might be, we'll mark it off with an X because we can't draw those on YouTube. I might imagine that the surface area of this boob, as we come down here, is going to be curved and sweeping in and under here where everything's bulging. Imagine a water balloon that's sort of sagging at the bottom part. It's bulging down there, but this part of the surface of the boob might still be a relatively straighter surface area. It's not popping out like a hard sphere. It's sweeping down and squeezing back just in and under like so when it's not being pushed around by other elements of clothing. So I'm just going to do another surface line down here where I lightly just get to describe that before popping back under around about there. And so our nipple zone might just be this kind of area around about here and around about here. And you'll notice that they're popping out, pointing away. Maybe this one's a little bit lower, but they're not both perfectly pointing towards us, not sticking straight forward. They're actually both aiming ever so slightly outwards. And again, this is just an example, all shapes and sizes, as I mentioned. So let's just talk about what's going on with that sweep here by having a look at an example just from a 3/4 view. Now, when it comes to looking this way across the chest, instead of sweeping in from the top center area, the other way that you can imagine this teardrop coming down is to start just from the inside edge of the shoulder. That's the other way I like to do it. And I'm going to imagine this flowing round right up until I kind of get near that halfway point, around about here. This is the point where I'm starting to actually really mark my pencil over the page. And I'm going to sweep back, out and around relatively generously, especially generous for a real life character, relatively generously for an anime character because things are blown way out of proportion. And I might just bring this line up to around about there and stop. Now what I'm imagining is that I've got some mass of boob material that might theoretically reach back up to the tuck of the armpit there and be this sort of shape. But in terms of the line that I'm actually going to lay down, I might just go around about here. Because again, these aren't hard squeezing shapes going on. These are soft, lovely, natural things, which are only going to fold enough to be worth marking down and indicating with hard, firm line work at certain points. Now, sure, you can use all sorts of hatching or other lines to indicate perhaps this area here, but for the sake of keeping it really simple, I don't have a problem at all of indicating a flow of the mass actually coming in and under. And when you get quite rotund characters or very chesty ladies as well, a lot of that line can actually reach right round under the arm, depending on how much skin and fold you've got going on. And then when it comes to having a look across this angle, because we're both pointing out in different directions, we're almost side on from the inside edge of this particular boob. And I'm going to imagine the surface of the chest as we come down here, down where the armpit is. And now I'm going to work relatively straight as we come out before I then bring that curve back round and in. And I'm just going to try to keep this as level as possible by slowly popping that form in. And the bottom part is a relatively even curve, which then curves a lot more and tucks right there at the bottom. I'm just trying to mark that nice and firmly, because that's where it's meeting and tucking back in against the chest. But over the top, this is much more of a gentle curve before we reach that point. And as this is sitting on a firm chest area, I'm not drawing another circle cutting in this direction. I'm actually going to just map how that boob then sits on the chest by going the other way and working up from there. And again, my line's stopping around about here, but you can sort of imagine that, okay, we've got this sort of shape going on, just to very loosely indicate both where the boob might start and connect from the chest, but also where we've got all the mammary and fat going on as well. And then let's just have a very quick indication line to go over the surface where we're working relatively straight and chill, sweeping out and then tucking in and under there. And then this particular line, if we're working down the center, sort of towards the nipple point, actually it's probably going to be right over that horizon edge, right down that side as well. But you can see now here, we've got these key line areas, just simple line work, defined by a little bit of basic geometry, just to help us place things really. But we've got this kind of organic feeling, hanging, sweeping forms. Nothing is sticking out super firmly. If this was more of a fake boob, or there was a bra that was squeezing the cleavage, I might come down here and pop straight out with some firmer circles, but naturally they're not going to be acting quite under those constraints. So let's have a quick look at another example over here, and we'll just have a look at a character with arms up. Now, a lot of you might already be familiar if you've drawn boobs or followed some of my earlier boob tutorials before. Remember, there's an entire playlist somewhere here in the corner. That when you raise up your arms, things kind of pull up as well. So let's just have a look at that from a slight angle this time as well, just to kind of ever so slightly give us a difference between one side and the other, and hopefully just increase the amount of opportunities we've got to use this in our own character work. As ever as well, plenty of things worth mentioning. We're here to learn how to draw the forms and so on. Sure, if you're going to do a how to draw boobs tutorial on the internet, loads of people are going to come out of the woodwork with all sorts of jokes. That's just part of life. I don't have a problem with it. But it is worth learning this, because this is all an important part of the anatomy of your own character work. So it's definitely worth making this something that you get right, because the chest and boob area for your character designs is a naturally very appealing area that gets a lot of attention. So make sure it's one of your proudest parts of your artwork. So I'm just raising up these shoulder circles ever so slightly, indicate we've got a pair of arms that are coming up and away, just like so, and just like so. A little bit of the center of the chest, I'm just going to line out here and bring down that rib cage cavity area just by sweeping from that center line here and here. I'm just getting this out of the way now because we've got a tiny bit of annoying armpit area to work into, which is, I come down this arm and I'm sweeping into my shoulder circle. Now this is just as important because, excuse me, this then sweeps down into the hanging boob area. And I'm cutting across the circle here and going outside the circle on the inside edge to indicate the fact we've got the deltoids or the shoulder muscles squeezed up to pull the arm upwards before then sweeping in to the collarbone area and then back out, up and around. On this side, we might catch a little bit of the neck muscles, the traps there, also catching on the edge of that circle, but that's still otherwise sweeping up and away before coming down and around to the front of the chest. Get that arm up there. Now on this far side, I'm just going to bring that arm back down into here. And remember that the lateral muscles are also sort of squeezing in, so I'll just give that a bit of bump there. And then on this edge, just because we're facing a bit more directly into the armpit zone, I'm going to sweep down around about here. And then I'm just going to loosely remember that this is split. The biceps are on this side, the triceps are at the back, and part of that lateral muscle area probably going to join in around about there. We don't need to draw all of those shapes, most of it's in shadow, but it does mean that I'm going to give a little bit more bump, just squeezing off there. Hands and feet for your drawing your character designs can be very annoying and very difficult. I always struggle with them. My secret other very difficult area is arms raised for a character and drawing the armpit correctly. It's a nightmare of their geometry. So this time I'm still using the shoulder level to help me understand the levelness that we're having the chest area. But now, instead of things sagging down into these circles, they're being pulled and squeezed and contorted ever so slightly. You don't have to go nuts. A bit more into ovals for being pulled up. And this essentially makes everything kind of appear a bit more pert. So I'm going to follow this shoulder edge line as we sweep past the armpit to give myself my first more oval shape. And I'm going to imagine coming down from the outside edge of the shoulder, not all the way to the center of the chest. We're not that generous today. Sweeping down like so. And in a very similar manner, I might come down on this edge. And now, instead of that very relaxed sweep here, this time I might just pop straight out into more of a circular shape. But I'm going to make it much more shallow. This is quite a deep, lovely bit of action here. But this time, because it's being squeezed up, I might only go out about so far at most before I'm coming back into the body and then just bringing that shape back up around about here. And again, when it comes to the actual lines that I'm going to be drawing, sure, I'm going to pop around this outside edge and cut back in towards the chest around about here. Fantastic. And I'd like to define maybe my way around about from here to define that line coming around about there. Again, the larger the cup size, the more you can draw this line all the way around, the more you can define that shift in direction of material across the chest. The material in this instance being boob fat and mammary. But otherwise, I might just stick with something like that and then let the fact that the particular nipple area in this particular example is going to just pull up maybe just a little bit higher. So if we're coming around about there, I might mark that off with an X just a bit further up here and here, because everything's being pulled up and squeezed up as part of the motion that's kind of sweeping everything into a bit more of a elongated feeling. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So what I'm also going to do, guys, is just run through a few more examples very quickly and tidy this up, because although you might not have a lot of cleavage squeezed together for your character designs if everything's natural and sweeping out, you might have characters that are simply very pert and very fortunate to have very generous chests that are still creating these very lovely shapes, and also how these boobs are going to deform if your character's kind of leaning over or on an all-fours situation, and the shapes that they're going to form then. So I'm going to run through that really quickly, and then we can discuss exactly what's going on in just a moment. Hey there guys, and welcome back. So yeah, as well as the examples that we've just been discussing across this top row, hopefully now that I've firmed everything up it's a little bit clearer. There's also plenty of examples, especially when you're working in the visual language of anime and manga, where you can have much more larger chested characters, but are still also very pert. There's still quite a lot of mass, but it does still hang relatively high up across the ribcage. However, in order to still give it the idea that it's hanging and feeling a bit more natural, I've split this into two stages. I've got this area where the whole mammary zone is really filled out. We're still making sure that we hang and sag and tuck in even just a little bit. We're not doing perfect circles because it's not going to work. And also there's this top area as well where the boob area actually starts and then comes down before it then sweeps out. I'm certainly not going to start from up here and then pop straight out. I want to just show that things are hanging down and then coming out and then filling. Also, in anime, we can get away with this and just say, hey, the joys of being in your early 20s and very naturally firm. But in reality, this sort of design language is entering implant territory. And all of it is fine and valid. But please remember, boobs are lovely organic things if they're not artificially filled in, and they're going to swing and sway as such. So when you've got a character that's leaning over, that shape is going to deform, and actually it's going to just drop and thin out towards the bottom, because all this area where it meets into the chest pulls down and then drops. Again, imagine some water balloons in shopping bags. So we're just going to sweep off into these gentle curving points. We're not necessarily drawing big, massive ellipses. You're not imagining a big pair of eggs that are hanging off here. Actually, these lines are sweeping together and it's tapering towards the end. And then just a similar example from another angle, because I know a lot of you guys like to use these as references, where we're going to still see the ribcage line be relatively firm and tuck under that edge before that boob hangs down. And with the underside here, I've still given it just a little bit of curve, still giving this particular boob quite a lot of mass, where I'm still bulging out a little bit before I then decide to taper in, just like we had at the front. So as ever, guys, I will be adding this particular scan into the tutorials workpack on Patreon. And if you'd like to grab this and all of the other images that we've been doing for the tutorial series, you can do so for just $1 over on Patreon. Links, of course, below, because I love making free drawing tutorials for you guys. I don't have any paid courses. I just want you guys to pick up a pencil and have a go at drawing stuff. But the only way that that's possible is thanks to all of your lovely support on Patreon. So shout out to the lovely people whose names you've been seeing on screen right now. Okay guys, so hopefully this gives you the opportunity to have some natural looking chests for your own anime and manga designs. Get in the comment section and let me know what we're going to be drawing next time. And otherwise, take care.